So welcome back everyone after the long period of absence, summer reasons. Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gridhidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radavashinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunnandi Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapadakramopanishadai Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyana Vastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidasura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. I was chanting at the first and the last of a short hymn in praise of this text, Bhagavad Gita. The first one addresses this sacred book as the mother who's teaching the world the message of spiritual unity, oneness of the whole creation. And the second one talks about the lineage of this tradition. For thousands of years, great sages and saints who are meditating on the divine were experiencing the unity and oneness of existence in their own hearts by meditating on this text. These are the two verses. Now, today we are going to discuss the 16th chapter. We already have discussed the 15th chapter in the last session. So today we are discussing the 16th chapter. It's very interesting. The 16th chapter actually discusses the human characteristics. It's very interesting. It divides humanity into two groups. Those who are naturally, instinctively devoted to doing good things, thinking good thoughts, speaking good things, living a good life as a natural instinct, not by force. So it's in a way, it deals with what may be called divine or spiritual or good characteristics. You can find such people everywhere, in every country, every race, every religion, every tradition, even among animals. If you look at the videos of dogs and cats, how they behave, even elephants, and you can see. So, interestingly, it's not just about human beings. In every living being, you can find these two types of characteristics. It's called divine characteristics, called Daivi Sampat. Actually comes from Deva. Deva means the divine. The divine wealth, so to speak. Those who are divinely good, those who have this divine wealth, the spiritual wealth of natural spiritual instincts. So divine. The opposite of this. Those who are different from this. Those who have a natural instinct for the opposite of what we just described. The divine. It's called Asuri Sampat. In a way, let us say, if to give a simple example that may make things very clear. Suppose we are living in this world, we go for job, we make money, we do business transactions, we do even fighting in army and military, we may do. We may engage ourselves in all kinds of activities. But there are those who, in spite of whatever they do, no matter what they do, they instinctively follow certain principles of modesty, maturity, and self-restraint. Again, this is instinctive. So, these ancient religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, all these religions would tell you that they have acquired all these characteristics by their good actions in their previous life, so they are born with these divine attributes or spiritual characteristics. This is the interpretation that you find in Buddhism, Hinduism, and so on. But you follow certain dharma. In other words, the traditional language of ancient Hinduism, dharma and artha regulated by, artha and kama regulated by dharma. Artha means you need some tools, some means to acquire material comforts. Kama means desires. So every human being will have some desires. And also they may need certain tools, certain instruments like money, wealth, and so on to fulfill those desires. But suppose we are regulated, we are restrained in our efforts to acquire artha and kama, wealth and comforts, but we are regulated by a sense of self-restraint, a sense of dharma, a sense of propriety, a sense of righteousness. Then you belong to this the category of people with Daivi Sampat, instinct. In just opposite to this, there are people who, means justify the end. I was recently giving a talk on Lord Krishna and his concept of statecraft, statesmanship. So I was talking about Niccolo Machiavelli. The ends justify the means. So whatever you can do, you do, and achieve whatever you want, no matter by any means, by crooked means, whatever it is. It's an example of Asuri Sampat, means the opposite of divine, the opposite of spiritual. You follow the path of comforts, success, achievements, wealth, but don't bother about certain restraining values. In modern psychology or psychiatry, we have discovered that those who follow this path, they get their own punishment without the necessary intervention of a god. Because when people work hard to make money, to make wealth, to become successful, dictators and the great oligarchs or autocrats, called scourges of humanity, finally something else happens to them and that wrecks their own mental life. The ultimate result is total failure in the spiritual sense. It's an example of Asuri Sampat, the opposite of spiritual. Now Lord Krishna is, in a very, very profound spiritual way, pointing out the dangers of following the wrong path. The essential characteristic of people who are endowed with spiritual qualities, called Daivi Sampat, is tyaga, renunciation, which involves modesty, which involves a sense of higher transcendental value, a sense of self-restraint. Well, there are people, and the world, human civilization survived because of those people. There are people who have this inherent inner correcting mechanism that tells them, don't do that. People don't listen to that voice coming from within. Every normal human being, I'm not talking about hardcore criminals or indoctrinated terrorists. I'm talking about normal human being, even an average human being who may commit mistakes, may happen to do things which may not be appropriate. But every time when they try to do that, at least during the first few occasions, there is a voice coming from within, better don't do that. We do not listen to that voice. And then what happens, we start doing things the wrong way, and it becomes an instinct, and then slowly we fall in the category of Asuri Sampat. But those who are listening to this voice, they they normally have a sense of self-restraint, self-control. Human mind can often tempt us, can prompt us to do things which may not be good for us. But the same human mind also will tell us, better don't do that. We should listen to that. So it's a very interesting chapter, and now we are coming to the subject. In short, Lord Krishna technically talks about 26 divine attributes and 6 unspiritual instinctive characteristics, which again manifest in 18 different ways. So I'm not going to this arithmetic or anything like that. So I'm just coming to the subject. The first one, for example, Abhayam Sattva Samshuddhi Jnana Yoga Vyavasthitihi Dhanam Damascha Yajnascha Swadhyayaha Taba Arjavam. The first verse. Let us look at this. What are the characteristics of a person who have a spiritual instinct? Essentially a good person. First, he will not be afraid of anything. It is not the recklessness of some hardcore criminals. It is a natural sense of inner serenity that he always has good things to speak, to do, and to think. So the very idea of being fearful, being a source of fear to others, and being afraid of others. Yasmanu dijate loku, lokanu dijacheha. In another chapter, in the second chapter, in fact, there is a very similar fraction in the Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, from 55th to 72nd verse, 18 chapters, Lord Krishna gives a long list of a number of spiritual characteristics of highly evolved spiritual persons. Second chapter, 55th to 72nd verse. He calls it Sthaprajna Lakshana, means characteristics of a spiritually enlightened person. And this you can find in the 12th chapter, Bhakti Yoga. Also you find who is a real devotee of God. The one who is not afraid of anyone, and the one of whom nobody is afraid. He doesn't do anything that creates fear to others, and he doesn't need to be afraid of anyone. So this is the first characteristic. Second, Sattva Samshuddhi means purity of mind, purity of heart. Mind will be pure. So it's a very abstract characteristic when you just say mental purity. It's very abstract. You cannot really, but we can see essentially. When our mind, our thought, and our word come and they agree on one thing. I mean, we don't say something and think something else and do something else. That is that's because of mental impurity. So a person who is mentally pure will have this straightforwardness. Yeah, that is Sattva Samshuddhi. Mind is devoid of, free from unspiritual characteristics. And one advantage of having this mind is you can sleep peacefully. That's in fact, we are ourselves the beneficiaries of this one. If you can keep the mind like that, after all, and the highest Vedanta philosophy will tell you, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. It means all these things, the wealth, money, status, all these are necessary. Health, Medicare, bank balance, all absolutely wonderful, necessary, but these things are not permanent. Everyone knows that. The body also gets old. Money also is lost in the bank. A very well-known, famous person may fall from grace. All this happened, which essentially tells you that everything in this world by its very nature impermanent or non-permanent. That's what Vedanta tells you. And there is only one reality, the divine, that is permanent. Then why worry? So actually this can give us very good sleep. So if we can straighten our mind, we can avoid taking sleeping pills. That's simple advantage. And also we can avoid creating situations for others for taking pills. The pharmaceutical industry may collapse. Then Jnana Yoga Vyavasthitihi. These are a bit abstract. Remember, I told this many times in the past. This Bhagavad Gita, which has got 700 verses divided into 18 chapters, is a small fragment of a much larger work, a classic, Mahabharata, which has got more than 100,000 verses. And all its important commentaries were written by the end of 16th century. In fact, we have more than 18 important commentaries in Sanskrit. Beginning, of course, there were earlier commentaries in ancient times, but they were superseded by a masterly commentary that was written by Adi Shankaracharya in 8th century. So ever from 8th century, a fresh series of commentaries happened to be written on Bhagavad Gita. And that trend came to an end in 16th century. The last one was Madhusudana Saraswati's Artha, which is actually a commentary on Shankaracharya's commentary, following the footsteps of Shankaracharya. Ever since 16th century, whatever we got is somehow some kind of a modified version of all these ancient commentaries. And in modern times, beginning with 19th century, you find Lokamanya Tilak wrote Gita Ragasya. In modern age, Swami Chinmayananda, Swami Ranganathananda, many great monks from India have written, but it's all following the footsteps of these ancient commentaries. So let us say what these ancient commentaries tell you. So I want to read out a few portions for this ancient work, this comment, because the magic where we are connecting ourselves with ancient minds. So we get these authentic words. So Shankaracharya actually says, Jnanam Shastrataha Acharidascha Atmadi Padarthanam Avagamaha Avagadanam Indriyadi Upasamharena Egagradaya Swatma Samvedana Badanam Yogaha, etc. What Shankaracharya says is, what is Jnanam? It's called Shastram. So you can find here. Jnanam, Jnana Yoga Vyavasthiti, the word comes here. In translation, you find knowledge. It's a simple word, but it's got a profound meaning and implication. So Shankaracharya says, this jnana means, in modern science, shastram in Sanskrit also means what you call in modern English science or technology. Of course, it can be shastram. But there is an empirical science which you can experiment with, you can do work in a laboratory, you can demonstrate. But what about spiritual science? So Shankaracharya says, when it comes to spiritual science, what has been followed by ancient masters who recorded their own experiences in ancient books, which are taught by lineage of teachers and students, and which are being experimented and demonstrated not in the laboratory, but in their own life. That is Shastra. So when it comes to spirituality, you have to remember, who are the Einsteins of spirituality? You may call Christ, Shankaracharya, or any of these great masters. They are the Einsteins of spirituality. You won't be able to attend even a college, in a primary school, if you say, I don't agree with Einstein, then you will be out. You will go practically be illiterate. So in spirituality also, there is a lineage of science. They practice, they study, they practice. So Shankaracharya says, Shastram here means these great sciences. Remember, here we are not talking about God or worshipping God, praying to God or anything. purely, in a way, all these ideas do have a relevance even for agnostics. They would agree, they would disagree with what Krishna is telling you. Your life should be such that nobody needs to be afraid of you, and you are also not afraid of anyone. Abhayam. And how do we become like that? By mental purity. How do we become mentally pure? Our word, our thought, our action, all same. So there is no need for anyone to be afraid of us. And we also don't feel the need to be afraid of anyone. And where do we get this knowledge? From ancient sages. How? They meditated, they practiced, so they found out it's better to be straightforward, better to be mentally pure, it's better to live our life in such a way that we need not be afraid of anyone, and there is no one who feels the need to be afraid of us. Our life is such that everyone knows we won't do any harm to anyone, and we also know our mind is such that we don't feel the need to be concerned about somebody doing harm to us. This is the science. Shankaracharya is the ancient science. So, and then being established in that attitude, Jnana Yoga Vyavasthiti. It's not a concept or an idea that we believe in, that we accept. It is a state of mind, a way of life in which we get established ourselves. So these divine or spiritual characteristics are qualities in which we get established, and not something that you believe in. Our life is linked to all this. And then it continues, Dhanam Dhamasya Yajñasya Swadhyayaka Tava Arjavam. So Dhanam, charity as a natural, spontaneous, instinctive quality of being charitable and broad-minded towards others. Not as an act of charity, but as a way of life based on charity. So it goes very deep. Of course, one should begin by external practices. That's also there. In somewhere else, in another, in second chapter, in one of his important passages, Shankaracharya writes that all these qualities are listed because they show us the way to eventually become spiritually enlightened. Suppose we feel that but instinctively we are not very charitable. But suppose we pursued our own mind to practice charity. Now again it will come, Shanti Rapayishunam, it comes like that. Ahimsa, Satyam, Krodha, etc. It comes like that. So, kindness, compassion, non-violence, inner peace, non-covetousness, all these qualities will be listed here in course of time. And then Shankaracharya gives a reason why these qualities are listed. Because if we try to practice some of those characteristics in our life by doing things, say, suppose we feel, we have a feeling, well, I'm not compassionate. Sometimes I did harm to a dog, I threw stones at a dog, I did not treat well my neighbor, or this feeling comes to our mind. Then we try to practice charity, good neighborliness or compassion to animals through physical actions. Then these actions will gradually develop into this charity, this attitude of charity, the instinct of charity, an instinctive quality of being charitable. So charity slowly grows in our mind as an instinctive quality if we try to practice it in our actions. That's why these qualities are mentioned here. So these are two stages. All these characteristics have two stages of development. Stage one, We read about this, we try to practice some of this. Second, at a higher stage, we become naturally established in these higher qualities. Then you become a Buddha, that's all. So that's why the list continues. Dhanam, Damascha, Yajnascha, Swadhyayastava, Arjavam. So charity. Then Dhamma, Manaso, Vishayonmukha, Nivritti, Samsiranam. Actually, Ramanuja is another commentator who came after Shankaracharya. He wrote a famous commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. He says, Manasaha, Vishayonmukha, Nivritti, Siranam. So, when our mind goes after external empirical things, we should try to divert our mind away from the objects of enjoyment. Mind has a natural tendency to go after, to seek external things for enjoyment and comforts. That's how mind is designed. Mind gets connected to the external world through eyes. When mind and eyes come together, we see things. When mind and ears come together, we hear things. When mind and sense of touch come together, we come to know by touching things. So smell, when mind and sense of smell and sense of taste, that's how mind operates. So mind naturally gets drawn to external outward things. So that mind should be slowly turned inward. That is Dhamma. So, and this is Ramanuja's great statement. So when we read English translations, you should remember it is not their copyright. The whole work was done by ancient masters. And the last great commentary on Bhagavad Gita was completed in 16th century. That is by Madhusudana Saraswati, who was a follower of Shankaracharya. After that, everything that was written is one way or other permutation, combination, some kind of different interpretation. Attempt to follow their footsteps. That's why I want you to hear some of these ancient sacred words. So the Ramanuja writes in 12th century, as a first discipline, we should try to turn our mind away from external, empirical sources of enjoyment. That is Dhamma. Then the yajna. Yajna here, interesting, is some spiritual disciplines. A Christian may go to a church. A Jewish person may go to a synagogue, or Buddhist person may Buddhist temple, Hindus go to Hindu temple, anything. All these rituals. One may ask this question, are rituals so very important? Rituals do have a significance. And I want to elaborate this further, why it is mentioned here. Suppose we spend every week 2 hours for performing some spiritual, religious rituals. I know rituals normally do not produce any enjoyable results, normally. You have to travel for some time, you do some prayer, you do some rituals. People ask, I don't believe in rituals, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious. But actually, it is a very interesting excuse for not following any discipline in their life, in most cases. So rituals, not that rituals will bring God in front of you, no. It doesn't happen. That people may tell you, maybe a priest will tell you, if you do this ritual, God will appear. It's all absolute nonsense. But rituals will elevate our mind to a higher level. That's an important thing. Any worship, any prayer, any confession, whatever you do, with a sense of sanctity, sacredness, and sincerity, and honesty, and with a pure mind, then this ritual will have an elevating, refining effect on our mind. Our mind gets purified, our mind gets elevated, not because of the external ritual, but because of the care, sense of sanctity with which we perform the ritual. That's why ritual is important. Rituals constitute only the outer shell of religion. The essence of religion is spirituality or experience, inner contemplative experience. But to reach there, you have to begin somewhere. And where do we begin? We begin some external practices. So there is an interesting story from ancient books. It's a very interesting story. It demonstrates the importance of rituals. The story is that of a minister who was a very noble person, but for some reason his king got angry with him. So the minister was expelled from the kingdom and he was imprisoned on the top of a tower, and he had to stay there and he will die in course of time. His wife, who knew that he was so innocent, wanted to save him. So his wife was thinking and praying. And then what happened? This prayer created simultaneously an impact on the minister's mind. The minister, through some trustworthy servants or colleagues or assistants, sent a message to his wife, and the message was this: you come to the tower with a thin thread, with a bigger, stronger thread, then a big rope. So all this you bring, and also a tiny insect which will slowly creep and climb the tower and reach the top. And tie the thin the thin thread should be tied to the this insect's horns, and then put some honey there. So the insect will be drawn, attracted by the honey, the smell of the honey, and it will slowly crawl up, slowly, and there is a thread coming behind the insect, and behind the thread there is a rope, and behind the rope there is a strong, thick rope. So the insect, he did not know he was carrying all this big luggage, He slowly started climbing, attracted by the smell of honey, and then he reached the top of the tower, and the minister caught hold of the insect, the creature, and finally the thread, the rope, and the thick rope, and finally he escaped from the tower. Now, external practices are like the thin thread, because any external practice in any religious tradition, if done sincerely, will slowly enter our mind, and it will create a sense of sanctity and sacredness, what we call in Sanskrit Shraddha, in our mind, and that will eventually purify our mind. That's why yajna is mentioned here, external practices. These are also important for a beginner in spiritual life. Then listening to holy scriptures and reading, one should read, one should himself read. Just listening to somebody reading a book will not do. One should read his book, holy book, whatever it is, with all sincerity and sanctity. And arjavan, straightforwardness. Then it continues, ahimsa, satyam, akrodhas, tyaga, shanti, rapavishnam. Ahimsa, non-violence, a sense of non-violence, a natural instinctive sense of absence of violence, non-violence. Non-violence in word, in thought, and in deed. And truthfulness. And then absence of anger. Parapida phala chitta vigara rahitatvam, akrodhaka. That means the word we used here. Ahimsa, satyam, akrodhaka. So non-violence, truthfulness, and again absence of anger. Anger for a good reason, for a noble person, will not do any harm. But when we become angry and we become totally identified with that anger, that is dangerous, because that will actually affect our mind and body, nervous system. Anyone who gets angry all the time and identifies himself with anger, that actually affects the nervous system. That can create serious, even health problems at a higher level, in more serious level. So absence of anger. What's the difference between the anger of a spiritually elevated person, and anger of a person who doesn't care for these higher values. A spiritually elevated person will be angry for a higher cause, but his anger will not touch his mind. It will be the outer shell. But an ordinary person who doesn't care for any of these values, he gets angry and he gets completely identified with the anger, and it goes very deep into the system. It actually violates, it inflicts a great pain at the mental, at the mind. So here, akrodha means you can be angry, but you should not have any desire to do harm to anyone. So Ramanujacharya says, akrodhaka parapeda phala chitta vikara rahitatva means you should not have any desire to do harm to anyone, but you can be angry. A doctor is using maybe he pursues his skills, but he doesn't want to do harm to his patient, but he's trying to help him. A teacher may be angry. A mother may be angry with a child. Mother is not trying to do harm to the child. So, that's why Ramanujacharya says, krodha means a desire to do harm to another person. Akrodha, the opposite of krodha. Akrodha means the opposite of krodha. Absence of krodha, absence of anger. But it means total absence of any desire to do any harm to anyone. That's right. That's the force of the ancient commentators. Otherwise you can say you should not be angry. That will be ridiculous. People will not take it seriously. Without anger, no one can live in this world. Without anger, no one can do anything good in this world. A person who is never angry and never done anything good to the world or to himself. So, anger is necessary, but then that's why Ramanuja, the great commentator in 12th century says, Parapeda phala chitta vikara rahitatvam. Any kind of desire to do harm to anyone, no. That's the character. Total absence of that tendency to do harm to anyone. That is the characteristic of a spiritually elevated person. And then the list contains ahimsa, satyam, akrodha, tyaga, a sense of renunciation. The absence of the possessive tendency. That's also a big problem in modern times, the desire to possess everything. Can you imagine modern world? People don't want things because they ever think they will be able to use them. People really want things which they know will be totally of no use to them. But still they are not able to give up that desire. It's an important thing. We should always remember, how much can a person spend even if he tries? Suppose you live for 100 years, active, healthy life. How much can we spend? We know it very well. These things are going to be of no use to me and no use to anyone. But still we want to acquire them, possess them. The absence of that tendency is tyaga. So tyaga, the word may come renunciation, is the English meaning of the Sanskrit word tyaga. But tyaga here means absence of possessiveness, absence of desire for things that we don't need at all. Sri Ramakrishna, the teacher of Swami Vivekananda, says, householders need not practice external renunciation. Monks should practice external renunciation. Householders can acquire money, because if householders do not acquire money, then who will acquire money? Wealth, all these are necessary, but again, all this should be done with a sense of renunciation. What is renunciation? Renunciation is acquiring things without this extreme sense of possessiveness. When you acquire things used for good purpose, that is the meaning of renunciation for householders. That's an important thing. So you can find a very balanced, very coherent, and very logical interpretation of these characteristics. So that's why these classes are important, because very often when we read in the textbooks and the simple translation, it may not carry the entire implication, So that's the characteristic of a person with divine or spiritual qualities. Then Shanti, sense of inner peace, gentleness. Then Apaishunam, this no crookedness, absence of crookedness. Again, Daya Bhudeshu Aloluptam, compassion for all beings. Compassion for all beings. So, compassion not only to human beings, but to animals, to nature. Without compassion to nature, or compassion for fellow human beings will be of no use, because a polluted air and polluted water will not be an act of compassion, will not be signs of compassion for people who are living in this world. So, compassion for everything. This compassion again becomes a natural, instinctive quality, an attitude of life, an attitude towards things. Not something that we believe, I act of compassion. So you find in interfaith programs, today we will have a demonstration of compassion. No. That's wonderful, better than nothing. But what he is talking about is compassion for, as it becomes a natural instinct, without any effort. Otherwise, you have to make a lot of effort to show and demonstrate compassion for animals. So, animals are brought and give some dog biscuits to the pets, and this is wonderful. And then taking photograph, that's one. That is certainly better than nothing, because that may certainly give the right message to many people. But this compassion goes beyond that. I mean, a total incapacity to be cruel to other living beings. You are totally incapable of being cruel or being non-compassionate. So, that's the meaning of it. Again, Bhudeshu Alolu. Bhudeshu, he means all beings, mentioned, not for human beings, very important, all beings. Aloluptum. So, again, uncovetousness. I mean, you don't go about acquiring things, contentment. Then gentleness, hrihi, modesty. So modesty is very important. Modesty in our attitude, modesty in our interaction with others. So actually modesty is a characteristic of the well-bred in aristocratic traditional societies. But modesty here is a natural attitude of our mind, our life as a whole. I mean, and then absence of, then another important quality is mentioned here, achapalam, a kind of stability, absence of fickleness, stability. That's very important. Determination is important. A strong mind is needed to preserve and take care of your goodness. If you are good, if you are wonderful, but you are weak-minded, that's a very big danger. Anyone can hijack you culturally, psychologically. This is very important. So, all these good qualities are important, but our personality should be strong enough to take care of all these important good qualities. Suppose a person has got a lot of good qualities, but fickle-minded, he will be at the mercy of adventurers, or he will be at the mercy of people who are up to no good. So, all these qualities combined with stable mind, a strong personality, person who can take care of his own his own actions, his own affairs, without being hijacked, without being influenced in a negative manner by people. That's why, often association is very important. So, for a beginner in spiritual life, constant association with people with similar qualities will help us to develop these qualities and again reinforce these qualities in our mind. It doesn't mean that we cannot associate with people in general. Yes, it's okay. But important point is, whenever possible, whenever it is available, we should try to create some good association with people with similar qualities. Because when you are in the company of people with all these good qualities, then it is inevitable that you yourself will develop those qualities. That's an important thing. It's a very interesting discussion. I hope we didn't have a in-person discussion for quite a long time. You are most welcome to ask questions on any subject or any subject which was perhaps not discussed during the session. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. We're happy to be back in class.
Thank you.
I had an experience recently that raises the question why some of these qualities that are enumerated here, leading, ahimsa, chief among them, why they're disparaged sometimes overtly in contemporary society, why they're under attack. It came about because someone I admire, a friend of mine, said that in response to my complimenting them on their restraint, their freedom from anger, their general orientation towards nonviolence, just a general tranquility, and I complimented this fellow. And he jokingly said, well, I'm accused of not being in touch with the full expression of my feelings. And I thought, well, do you feel that way? Do you feel that you're unemotional? And he didn't feel that he was unemotional. He just felt that he was in good control. So my response to him was, well, why would you be attacked for it? And I still have that question. Why would anyone be attacked for having these qualities?
Yeah, people sometimes suspect that this man is not expressing his full feelings and is giving some kind of a sugar coating of his true emotions in nice language. And actually, that's because many people cannot even think of anything other than what the world presents before them. This is a very important thing. So, I was just giving the example, not a very pleasant example of Niccolo Machiavelli. He wrote Prince not because he wanted that to be the idealistic society. That is what he found in the country, in the small province where he was living. And later he was tortured and imprisoned. All this happened. So when there he wrote this small book. Why I'm a student of Western philosophy. So often you find modern stagecraft is more closely guided by Machiavelli's philosophy than that of Metternich or anyone who were more of a refined type who wanted this European balance of power. The reason is people cannot even think of anything other than that what the material world presents in front of them right now. There is nothing beyond what is now available in the world. So don't think of anything higher. It is utopian. It is not a full presentation of or expression of your feelings. You are something else. So I think such people should try to connect with some of these valuable ideas coming from our culture. Such great ideas you find in Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman philosopher king. You can find in Socrates, you can find in Plato, in Western tradition itself. So what they frequently do, they, in a way, I tell you, to be very frank, the modern business practices, the modern um, real politics, so to speak, is all defined by Machiavelli. Ends justify the means, even in business transactions. But at the same time, there is a small but increasing number of people who want a different world to live in. All these great movements for conservation of nature and people who have a urge for something higher and sublime is a proof that there are people who look for something higher and noble. So this person you refer to, he may have felt that people were accusing him of being lopsided or maybe partial, not doing full justice to his real emotions. He was expressing something, not giving full expression to his real emotions. He was giving a false face, false front. I think that is very unfortunate. So the only way, in my opinion, is along with this business management, information technology, all these research areas which are very important for our times, we should also connect with these ancient values. Every country, every civilization, every nationality has some spiritual resources in their heritage, the lineage, that's quickly forgotten, and we are so eager to be successful, to be active in the present-day empirical world. That's an important thing. So that person should read some of these great books, because you don't have the tradition of sages living those ideas, but there are books in the library which will, if they read, they will know that Aristotle had a different idea of the world, Plato had a different idea of the world, so also Spinoza or maybe Socrates. So why don't we reconnect? Why don't we connect with those great ideas? Not that we can go back to those times. So far as science and technology are concerned, we have to be right in 21st century. But so far values are concerned, we have to remember there are higher values in our heritage. We should reconnect them. This is the only way.
I'm happy to report he's very successful in business.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that...
Exactly. Yeah. Then even in business traditions, it's also important to have healthy relationship with the employees and employee. That concept is actually a kind of moving away from Machiavelli, really speaking. Yeah, okay, please continue.
Thank you for the talk this evening. When you started, you talked about people that were sort of a spiritual nature and people that were sort of self-serving. Yeah. Were you saying that is like at birth and you have to be reborn to switch that, or can you change during your lifetime?
Yeah. Okay, in fact, this is the problem of Buddhism and Hinduism and the religions of Indian origin, which insist on rebirth and doctrine of karma. But remember, one important thing I want to emphasize is the doctrine of karma and rebirth do not constitute anything like predeterminism. With the opposite of it. Actually, the doctrine of rebirth, which is linked to the doctrine of karma, is the opposite of predeterminism. Rather, what it means is, any person can begin a new life any day, any moment, if he or she wants. That's the real emphasis of the doctrine of karma and doctrine of reincarnation. Because if our present is the result of our past, then our future can be the result of the present. Why can't we build a new present so that we can build a new future? So any good activity, any good word, any good thought, anything which is spiritual, either in word, deed or thought we do, it actually elevates our mind, it actually brings our mind to a higher level. So it's like putting a little small check in the bank, spiritual bank. Even any act of charity, compassion, nobility is like putting, like depositing a check in the bank, in our own spiritual bank balance of karma. And that will again come to us. That's to give a proof. This can be psychologically demonstrated by anyone. Suppose a very miserly person, in his private life, without telling anyone, he reads a newspaper that there is a big calamity in some countries, and there's a call for charity, and he sends $100 check to help those people suffering from this or things. You find what will be, there are two effects. One, it will benefit somebody somewhere, but it will benefit him mentally. He feels, oh, I have done something sensible. It is, and this feeling have a healing effect on his mind, because it produces its own result, its own reward, without anyone else knowing about it. That's why he is doing it. You know why all these big captains of industry are doing so much of charity? They want to sleep better. Of course, there will be a lot of publicity, maybe, but in spite of all that, they want to sleep better. They want this comfortable feeling. They want to enjoy this comfortable feeling. We have done something worthwhile, wonderful. So any noble activity, activity doesn't mean physical activity. Words we speak, thought we think, and of course physical activities. All these can alter our mind, our character, and can elevate us mentally, spiritually. So there is no need to be born again. It's an important thing to remember. So the doctrine of rebirth and karma do not constitute any kind of predeterminism. Rather, it is the opposite of predeterminism. Nobody has ordained what we are going to be. We can build our own future. It doesn't mean that God has no role. God does have a role. We accept spirituality. But it is also true that God has given us all these resources. So this Vedanta can be applicable to any traditional believer, theist, and also even for an agnostic. So remember thing. Okay, thank you. Yeah. I don't know if I have addressed your question. Okay, thank you.
What does Gita say about when we harm somebody for their own good, for things like mercy killing? Is that not divine in any sense?
Okay, could you repeat a little louder, please?
I'm asking, what does Gita talk about when you harm somebody for their own good, say for things like mercy killing? Does that make somebody not divine?
Yeah, that's so. So that's the mercy killing. Of course, this subject doesn't occur as a subject of discussion in the Gita. But one thing we can say, it is, if the person is suffering a lot, then his continued life and suffering is more painful than death, then perhaps removal of sufferings should be the main concern, the main focus. That's an important thing. Because there are certain forms of illnesses which create a lot of problems. But I think right now in modern medicine, such cases are very, very rare. So taking away one's life is an act of can never be an act of mercy. But in medical science, the medical practitioners can decide if it brings a lot of misery and suffering to the patient. And then, of course, is it okay to let the person suffer? Intolerable suffering. Is that really an act of mercy to let him suffer? Or is it an act of mercy to put an end to his suffering? So there are many considerations in that respect. The relatives' view, the patient's views, and also the ethical considerations in medical fraternity. All these are very, very important. Gita doesn't mention anything about it. But what Gita emphasizes is we should not deliberately, consciously do anything or speak anything or think anything which be harmful to another person. Any kind of deliberate, conscious thought, act or word we should avoid. It constitutes an act of violence. It is himsa. That's the message of Gita. Okay, thank you. The conscious effort to harm to somebody. That's again conscious effort. For you may be walking over insects and ants and all, that's a different thing. But any conscious effort to do harm to another person, it amounts to an act of violence. That's the idea behind. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Swamiji, this is more of just a thought. It's not really complete question, but I was thinking of these higher values that you're talking about, these divine characteristics. It made me think of Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about virtue coming from character and character coming from habit, righteous living. I guess my question is it seems maybe this is a little cynical, but it seems in our modern life, we're not really teaching these traditional values anymore, like in school, and a lot of people are not really interested in formal religions anymore. So how do we, what would you recommend to bring these values, more to the forefront in our society, when they seem, and to a lot of people, old-fashioned or quaint, or they don't have economic utilitarian value, people would argue. But so how do we bring these values if people aren't going to go to organized religions, and if we're not teaching in schools and stuff like that? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, there is a lot of unfriendly feelings towards organized religions. They are not very comfortable with teaching organized religions of any kind. That's true. But without some role models to demonstrate, to talk about, values will not go very deep into human psyche. This is a very important thing. Values will disappear if you don't have a visible role models from history to present. This is a very important thing. So let's say, for example, mindfulness without Buddha. It becomes just a elementary, superficial program. And if you completely eliminate Buddha from mindfulness, Satipatthana Sutta is the original discourse of Buddha on which mindfulness is based. So then slowly it becomes some kind of a mental exercise. Then can we think of somebody who could actually do this? After 50 years, nobody will be able to give an answer. Or you think of, let's say, the Sermon on the Mount, you eliminate Christ from it. Or you teach these parables, but no Christ. The parables become stories. So also the great Bhagavad Gita. So sometimes people, it's a big trap actually. I don't believe in individuals. I don't believe in values. Values will be floating in the air and they will disappear. But this value should be connected to some strong rocky foundation on this earth. That is Buddha or Christ, whoever may be. Otherwise the values will be floating and disappear in the clouds. So I think individuals, enlightened citizens should strive to revive an interest in the traditional studies, not necessarily spiritual religious books alone. Religious books can be studied for ethical purpose, not for religious purpose. The moment you bring in priestcraft, the priest should do this, then the problem arises. And then the money involved and many things involved, That's one burden. See, Gita you can teach to anyone. Agnostic also can read Gita and be benefited. Gandhi, Gandhi was the one who was so... Gandhiji looked upon Gita as his mother, Mahatma Gandhi. But and Gandhiji on some occasions went to temples for some program. He never entered a temple. He did not do any worship or anything. But he considered himself to be a staunch Hindu. So the so-called religious books serve a purpose other than religion. Religion defined as priestcraft and this kind of the heredity, all these ecclesiastical hereditary things. So that's what I think. If you can liberate these higher values from the ecclesiastical clergy, then I think these values will be accepted. Actually, see the values taught in the Sermon on the Mount. They're so universal. It can be taught by any individual with some higher spiritual purpose. Or the Gita, or the Upanishads, or the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Anyone can learn those things, even without believing in God. So an important thing to remember. So I think in modern time there should be the citizens' effort, individual effort to revive interest in these higher studies, and take them out of the clutches of the hierarchical clergy. That's important. It sounds like you're saying we need strong role models to embody these values. Role models were always in Christian tradition. Great saints, Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Teresa of Avila, great example. Hinduism, so many examples. Buddhism, so many great examples. You find Judaism, so many mystics. So it's there. The point is, if you eliminate the individual examples, then in course of time, these ideas and teachings can become like floating clouds. So they should be linked by a thread to some living examples who may have lived long ago, not living in our own times. This is very important. Yeah. Thank you. So, okay. Any more, please?
Namaste, Maharaj.
Yeah, namaste.
Like, in continuation to the previous question,
Yeah.
Was this also the reason why the idea of Ved Vyas was brought in? Like, as the person who assimilated the Vedas? Was it because there was a need, a role model, or somebody who has assimilated these Vedas? Or why is the reason why we talk about a Ved Vyas this?
Vedavyasa himself was a great author, and in his books you find hundreds of saints, hundreds of philosophers, kings, sages, and discussions and debates. Mahabharata, hundreds of discussions you find, hundreds, and more than 100,000 verses, So all these great saints were examples of many of these qualities we are talking about, really speaking. It's interesting. Even look at the literary classics. They are not necessarily historical. Some historical background is there, of course, Mahabharata and Ramayana. There is history in it, but there is a lot of mythology in it. So even in these mythological books, you can find examples of these people of divine attributes, and also the examples of the opposite of the Asuri Sampat, means the evil attributes, the demons and all their characters you find. So the examples of the saints as living examples of these values, they are very important. Otherwise, we may start suspecting that these are all just ideas. It's an important thing to remember. Many of the philosophical ideas, utilitarianism or empiricism and all that, many of them are great things you can read about in books. You don't have somebody who's living like that, But when talking about Daivi Sampat, you can find in all religious traditions, because humanity has been divided into different lineages. In all nationalities, in all races, in all cultures, you find examples of this type. Great, supreme examples of people who are instinctively good and noble. And the opposite also you find. So, there are examples, but if you leave out the historical examples, there is always a possibility that people may not, they won't be able to connect these ideas with human life, real human life. So, it's an important thing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, hopefully we'll begin or we'll continue discussion next Friday. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.